One, two, three. This is Dr. Alex Avila with Love University. I'm an author, psychologist, and speaker. And as always, we're bringing you a show based on love internally and externally, how to love yourself, others, and a higher nature. And we're deep into our weekly guest lecture series here at Love University, where we bring in great guests to talk to you about relationships and self-esteem and self-help. And today I'm very pleased to present a very accomplished gentleman, Stephen Ng, who is a psychotherapist, licensed psychotherapist. He does forensic evaluations dealing with violent crimes. He's also an expert on sex, relationships, marriage. He has over 3 decades of experience in human relationships. He's written several books, and he's a very accomplished gentleman. And he also comes from an interesting background. He said his father was also a violent person who ended up being killed by police, and then he actually works with violent offenders today. So we're going to get into a lot of stuff like that. So first I want to welcome Stephen.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I am doing well. I'm really glad to be here with you today.
Yeah, we're very excited because you got some very fascinating topics. You seem like you're extremely accomplished. You're talking about love, relationships, but also abuse and conflict. How do those two go together? They seem like they're dichotomies.
Yeah, they do. And I think they are dichotomies, although it's, in my experience, before we can have true intimacy, we have to have a relationship that's truly safe, where we can share our lives together. I don't know if you'd agree with that, but I think
yes.
for most of us, that idea of safety depends on an environment that's abuse-free. So even if I'm hardly ever abusive, but maybe once a month or once every 6 months, that has a very chilling effect on whether or not the atmosphere is safe in our home.
Definitely. And I think when you define abuse, a lot of people think of abuse as physical violence, even domestic violence. And I actually work a lot with victims of crime. And, domestic violence is a common thing, unfortunately. But I think you're talking about almost something different. You're talking about almost like an emotional abuse, things like that. Can you tell us more about how you define abuse in this context?
Yeah, I like actually what one human rights worker, famous one named Gandhi, said a long time ago. Any attempt to impose my will upon another is an act of violence. And the idea there is that when we, as adults, get together to share a relationship, we at no time do a side agreement or put a footnote in our marriage contract that says, and occasionally, if I think it's appropriate and going to be helpful, I reserve the right to be abusive of you. None of us do that. So, but yet all of us have, if we search our memories, we can all remember a time when we used, abusive techniques on other people, like guilt tripping them, using a tone of voice that was either intimidating or condescending. And if you have this, what I encourage my clients to think about is having an abuse-free relationship, embracing that and making a personal commitment to that lifestyle, independent of the relationship, because then it's an existential issue. It's really about who are you? Did you ever want to grow up to become an abusive person? Well, and of course, my clients always say no. And
well, Stephen, you have a very, I was thinking you have a very harmonious and very kind of a melodious voice, melodious. But do you ever get angry? What do you like when you get angry?
Oh my gosh, yeah, I get angry, and I raised one son with ADHD, and I didn't even know what ADHD was back then.
Okay.
I had plenty of opportunities to be angry. And I grew up, as you pointed out, I grew up in a family that was fairly violent, and my mother was definitely a part of that violence.
Right.
Of course, I think most of us who are in this conversation together know that anger is always a secondary emotion, and the primary emotion is always going to be fear. So
yes.
What I always like to ask myself and others is, when I see a lot of anger or any anger, is like, well, what is it that I'm afraid of? What am I afraid of seeing here?
Yes, I like that. That's kind of reversing the paradigm a little bit.
A little bit.
And you also talk about respect. And you say when people treat each other respectfully, they stay in what's called the prefrontal cortex of the brain, the part of us that's logical and rational. But when you go into what you call aggression or microaggression, you talk about the amygdala, which is the primitive fight or flight response. What happens there biologically to people when they get into that?
Well, it's funny how easily that lizard brain of ours gets triggered, right? Because it's running 24/7. It is always on the job of threat assessment. So even if I'm having a perfectly rational conversation like the one we're having right now, we're just talking about cerebral issues, and all it would take is for one of us to use a tone of voice that was less than respectful,
right,
all of us, my amygdala is fired up and ready to go.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll do a little martial arts, a little sparring, huh, if we need to.
Right, right. So now the quality of my performance in terms of cognition and processing the information you're presenting to me, that's going to be impaired. So when people get in a fight, like in their marriage or in their relationship, and they start yelling at each other,
Right.
that is one of the most self-defeating things we can do in terms of trying to engage in effective problem solving.
Definitely. Now, Stephen, you talk about the abuse-free life. So I'll play a little bit of an opposite point of view here. Someone would argue, well, you're talking about being compassionate and kind and gentle, but is that really realistic in our society? We have frustrations and traffic jams and even parents, they're not taught to be compassionate or empathetic in college or high school. We don't really learn this stuff. So how do you expect society to all of a sudden be kind and kind-hearted in our society?
Yeah, and your observation is right on. So, yeah, if I did have that magic wand that could handle
Yes.
all of society, I would certainly love everybody to buy into this. But what I'm talking about is making my home a safe place. Mm-hmm. Sort of like in baseball, when you slide into home base,
Right.
you're safe. And I know that at work, there can be people who want our jobs and are willing to do anything to get them. There are people who on the freeway, on the drive home, don't care whether they run us off the road.
Right.
But by the time we get home,
Right.
we should be able to breathe. And our home should actually be exactly what the word implies, a safe.
I like that. So you're saying like changing the individual home, and that can and eventually change society as well. So you're starting one home at a time in some ways.
Exactly. And the great thing about this for everyone who's listening is that's the one area where they have real control. I can't control my place of work and what other people do, but and I would encourage people who are single listening to this to consider this as well, because as a single person living alone, they can enjoy the pleasure of what is it like to live in an abuse-free environment. And then the idea being, why on earth would I ever lower the quality of my life by getting involved with somebody who reserves to themselves the right to get abusive?
Right. Remember, Steve, you forgot something. What if you're abusive to yourself and not compassionate? That could even be worse in some ways.
Oh, yeah. Well, with all the negative critical self-talk, and I'm no stranger to that either.
Yes, definitely. So we talk in Love University about loving yourself, others, and a higher nature. But obviously loving yourself is really the essence where it all begins. And I think you talk a lot about that in your work with people, right? Their past childhood experiences.
Yes. For me, I don't know if you've heard of the work of Dr. Gabor Mate, but he's a Canadian who's written some wonderful books. One of them most recently is In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts. And he talks about how in addiction, working with drug addicts and alcoholics, that people drink and abuse substances for a reason. And I think that reason, in his opinion, is early childhood trauma. And I think he's absolutely right. I don't see any way that I've never spoken to a client who didn't have an impression of early childhood trauma. Now, some of us drink and some of us use drugs and some of us just shop a lot and some of us, like me, are workaholics and are compulsive in some other ways, like being critical, including self-critical. And if we can go back and look at what it was that got us started in our compulsions, because our compulsions really are a way of comforting ourselves.
That's true. But Stephen, let's say you're a 40-year-old man and you're still blaming your parents and you still live at home or something like that. What do you think about those kind of things? People that, say they're still suffering from the past, but they don't make any changes in the future. Right,
and that's a real problem. And that, this business of the blame game and trying to figure out and assess who really deserves the blame for my misery is rather a useless exercise in burning up some calories. Exactly. So I really need to, it doesn't really matter. The whole question of blame doesn't matter at all. It's just not germane to the conversation of how can I live a fulfilling, satisfying life.
Exactly.
I'm my own parent now. I am an adult. This is now my problem. I'm the one who has to deal with it.
Right. So you recognize the past, but you also work on yourself to change the future. So it's it's two-part. Now, also, you talk about successful relationships, and I like your definition. You say that a good relationship, the purpose is to create a strategic alliance to solve life's problems and to create mutual happiness. And my definition is somewhat similar, but a little different, is a deep understanding of another to create light in the world. So in some ways we're coming at it from different angles, but we're kind of looking at the same thing. Tell us a little bit about your definition.
Well, for me, it's so funny because one of my greatest learning experiences was the epic failure of my first marriage.
Yes.
And one of the ways I liked learning, well, do you remember that question from when we were kids and the teacher would say, and what have we learned? And I remember thinking about my failed marriage and being really angry and upset about it and really being tempted to want to blame her. Yes. And instead, I knew deep down that what I needed to do was to take responsibility for my choice and to look at what it was I was doing that had set that up and why I stayed for each and every one of those very profoundly unsatisfying days. And that's ultimately all about me.
Was your wife abusive to you, like verbally or non-verbally?
Both verbally and physically.
Wow, okay. So you experienced, some men are victims of domestic violence as well, but they don't like to talk about it too much. It's kind of embarrassing.
Well, yeah, one of my epic heroes in life is Abraham Lincoln, and he was the victim of domestic violence with Mary Todd.
Right.
He would regularly appear with bruises on his face.
Interesting. And conflict, is actually one of the things you talk about, that it's essential even in love, or at least it's part of a relationship. So there's no getting around it. And and I've written some books on Myers-Briggs personality type, love types, and guy types, and we talk about the personality type differences. For example, the spontaneous versus the structured person. And the structured person is always organized and on time, and the spontaneous is always late. So often, that can create a lot of conflict. They can fight with each other. The spontaneous person says, "You're so messy and you're irresponsible," and the other person says, "Well, hey, relax, enjoy life."
Yeah, right.
So how do you deal with that? Those natural conflicts that come up, and like you said, not be abusive and be respectful with your partner.
And we're talking about any relationship, including two close platonic friends. Two men who are great friends. Mm-hmm. They're going to have differing points of view, and they get to have arguments. And for me, conflict is an essential and inevitable part of every intimate relationship, including platonic friendship. Mm. So if I can just accept that, now I'm normalizing it, and we're not in a crisis. There's nothing bad happening if we're having an argument. Mm. The only thing we're really afraid of is, when you boil it all down, it's the abusive element. Once you have confidence that the argument or the conflict is always going to be abuse-free, it's always going to be respectful, then you get to get around that and go on and have great arguments.
So you mentioned like an angry face or clenched fist could be considered abusive, or is it just part of conflict? How do you draw the line? Because everyone gets angry in their face.
I think that's a great question, because everybody wants to know that. And what I tell my clients is, if you're loving somebody and you look loving and you sound loving, okay with that. And when you're afraid and you look and sound afraid, we're okay with that. When you're angry, you have to have some wiggle room to look and sound angry. But we can do that without necessarily crossing the line into abuse, into intimidation. So, again, back as our teachers taught us back in kindergarten, use your words. You can go ahead and say, "I'm really angry right now," and you can even say it intensively and with a face that looks angry. "I'm really angry right now," but that isn't by itself abusive.
I remember they used to say, "Sticks and stones can break my bones, but words can never hurt me." In the old school approach, is that still the case, or are words able to break your bones today?
Well, I think we have to. We honor our parents by growing and getting even better than our parents. Okay. I feel this way about my kids. I'm glad if my kids go on to have a better way of life. So for me, it's really clear, and we would all feel this way, have perfect clarity. If somebody insulted your mother, we would be absolutely clear that was unacceptable behavior.
Right.
And we just have to love ourselves enough to have the same standard for ourselves.
Yes, definitely. Now, I work a lot with introvert and shy people, and also with males, the so-called sensitive male. And research does show that males usually suffer more when there's relationship conflict. Their heart rate goes higher, they have more blood pressure, they have more physiological arousal. So that's why they often want to basically escape or evade. and leave the situation. And of course, if they don't, they might actually blow up eventually, and they kind of hold it inside. Whereas women are better able to, keep talking and maybe resolve the conflict. Have you seen that in your practice with males and females?
Absolutely. I mean, honestly, I think this is one of the biggest problems in our society, and it might shock you to hear me say, I think it's really a matter of sex education, because when we talk about sex education normally in the United States, we're talking about anatomy and physiology, diseases and pregnancy. But it certainly mate selection and intimacy skills are a vital part of how to form a family unit. And if we don't learn, we men, I'm speaking specifically to the men, we need to learn how to conflict with one another. We need to learn how to use our words. And I think a lot of us guys have this irrational belief, well, several irrational beliefs around conflict that, well, if we love each other, we'll never fight. Right. Well, if we love each other, we'll always be happy. And those aren't true.
That's a good point. And then women may complain the guy doesn't want to talk. He's kind of going within himself. So it can be a challenge. Now, Stephen, let's get into some of the techniques, because this is really the interesting part for a lot of our listeners. Is okay. We know that abuse is bad. We know conflict is inevitable, and we kind of want to be in that middle ground where we can fight fairly and all that. So let's talk about some techniques, because I think you talk about de-escalation versus escalation and what we call fair fighting. Tell us a little bit about that. How can couples fight in a good way that's not abusive?
I'd be glad to. And first, remember, we're assuming that each individual involved in this intervention has made a commitment to themselves that they are going to lead an abuse-free life. Yes. Once we've internalized that, that becomes the first of 3 rules in fair fighting. And by fair fighting, we mean fighting according to the rules of Hoyle, for example. We have to be able to do things not according to the law of the jungle, where might is right. But where we're playing fair with each other. Right. So the first rule is no abuse. And you and I have that rule in our practices where it says do no harm. Yes. We're not supposed to harm anybody. And how hard is it to not harm somebody? It's not that hard, but it takes a commitment. It takes a conscious effort to be mindful of that. And that no matter how angry and upset we are, all of our problems lie outside of that strategic alliance, outside of the bubble of that strategic alliance. Yes. The second rule in fair fighting is by mutual consent. In other words, we're not going to have a fight that's similar to a gang drive-by shooting where one of us has the hand on the doorknob on the way to work and the other one says, and another thing, I didn't like the way you treated my mother last week.
It's not like a WWE, like a pylon, like you get 3 or 4 people to jump on you or something.
Exactly. But I'm trapped, right? Because I've got my hand on the doorknob for a reason. I've got to get to work, and I've got to get to work on time. But I care about my partner, and I want to solve this problem. And so I can't do both. And that's why by mutual consent, and this might surprise people who are listening, but my wife and I have been together for 24 years, and we do fight, and we do get angry and upset with each other. But because we're committed to success, we know that we need to be fighting when we're at our best instead of giving each other the leftovers of our day.
I like that. Yes, that's really a very intelligent way to do things.
So we schedule things instead of having the fight at 11 o'clock at night when we're both exhausted or, before we've had breakfast. We don't do that. So it's more like a meeting of an executive board of directors.
Wow. I like when I read that, I thought that was cool. But what if people say, no, I'm mad now. I want to deal with this. I don't care if it's 1 a.m. How do people hold back from the primitive impulse to, fight verbally when they have the anger?
Yeah, that brings up another whole issue, and that is, the intentional interview. Before I commit to a strategic alliance, I really need to know a lot about the person I'm making my commitment to. Right. So for me, that means I've got to spend some time getting to know them. And one of the things is I want to know how they fight. Yes. I want to talk to them about my commitment to the abuse-free life And I want them, if we get to a certain point, certainly not on a first date, but at some point in the relationship, I want to know that they're committed to an abuse-free life.
Right. I think you called it the rule of three. You said to study 3 fights before you make a commitment.
Exactly. I'm actually pleasantly surprised you read that, because
Sure.
I want to know, number one, if my partner has the courage to confront me when my partner thinks I'm out of line.
Right.
And number two, does my partner have the savoir-faire to confront me without becoming, reverting back to the law of the jungle, right?
Yes. Throwing things or breaking things or cursing or that kind of stuff, right? Being personal.
So I want to, or giving me the cold shoulder. I mean, there's so many passive aggressive things we can do to each other.
Right.
And, we know that disrespect is an amazingly accurate predictor of future marital breakup.
And the thing is, when we talk about fighting in a fair way or a positive way, I guess you could say, obviously if someone's violent or, like you said, resentful, that's not good. But you also even say that if they agree with you, if they're a people pleaser, that's not a good thing either, because you feel lonely that they don't really have your back. Can you tell us about that? Because we think, nice people are good partners, but is that always the case?
No, it's really not the case. I mean, what I need, being heterosexual, let me put this in heteronormative terms, what I need in my life is a woman who can have my back. I can't actually trust her in that strategic alliance to have my back if she doesn't have the courage to speak up when she thinks something's out of line.
Right. So if your pants are a little bit too low or there's a sticker or something on it, you want her to tell you before you walk out.
And that would be the least of it, right? I mean, I've got far worse faults than that.
Okay, so you want her to help you, like if you're doing something wrong, you're saying that she can say that it's wrong and help you with that, you're saying.
Well, at least she can say, hold up, what's going on here? Let's take a look at this. So, not necessarily, as they say in AA, not necessarily taking my inventory and telling me what's wrong with me.
Right.
Because I think that sort of criticism is borderline abuse. But to share with me her feelings, and I feel really uncomfortable, Steve, when you talk to me that way. Now, boy, that's a big heads up for me, because I love my wife. I don't want her to feel uncomfortable. And for me, or if she were to say, I feel really intimidated. Okay, now we're getting farther into the red zone. And I need to, for me, if I really want to make this alliance work, I need to go ahead and throttle back a bit and be a little more self-aware.
Now, Stephen, in the personality types, there are people that are called the thinkers, who are very logical, analytical, and to the point, and they're the feelers, who are more emotionally focused. And, it could be a male feeler with a female thinker.
Right.
So, for example, she might say to him, that shirt kind of makes you look fat. Now, in her thinking mind, that's a very logical statement. She's trying to help him, but he might take it very personally and feel hurt by that. So how do you look at that part of it? Is that a fair fighting, or is that a negative?
Well, for me, it isn't fair fighting, and for me, it is negative. But I think a thinker would appreciate this total prohibition on abuse, and it just means that she would have to find another way to share her feelings and the information that she thinks is important with her spouse.
Right.
Instead of saying something like, I'm a writer, for example,
Right.
and I love constructive feedback.
Right.
And I'm very aware that I need it. But have my wife throw a manuscript on the table and say, well, that really sucked.
Okay. Well, yeah. Are you a feeler, Stephen, or are you a thinker personality?
Well, it feels to me as though I've evolved, because I used to be the very cerebral kind of Mr. Spock type.
I see. Now you're touchy-feely? You're like Alan Alda in the MASH?
I am a little bit more like that. I actually am, because I went to years of Al-Anon to deal with family alcoholism.
Okay.
And those brave people in those rooms would start talking about feelings, and it was so inspiring. And I realized, hey, to be emotionally intimate, that would mean we'd have to share our feelings, right?
Exactly. That could be a whole workshop for males, how to be strong but feeling at the same time, how to balance the two sides.
Well, that's another great idea. I love ideas.
Something like that. But, and also I like when you talk about a personal commitment to be respectful. In other words, it's not something that comes naturally. You have to work at it, like you work out at the gym, like muscles. You work on your muscles. And, like Gottman, you may have heard of the marriage researcher that videotapes people's marriages and all that. He can determine if they're going to divorce. He's looking at nonverbal cues. And the key is, he said contempt is one of the predictors of divorce. Sarcasm, name-calling, and things like that. So how do you in his words, how do you create a culture of fondness and admiration for the partner? What do you guys need to do to move away from contempt, which is kind of like a subtle hatred, into love and fondness?
Wow. You're probably not going to like what I have to say. A lot of people might not.
Okay, let's hear it.
I do agree with that researcher. I think he's absolutely right. It's just that in my experience, women in particular, and I think it's a sexual issue because of the way they experience sex, I think women need to respect their partner. And when they lose respect, I think it's game over. I don't know that I've ever seen a woman regain respect. So that's bleak and rather hopeless sounding of me. But on the front end, I think there's a lot of ways to prevent that from happening. So, and really the abuse-free life is that first step. Because
so give me an example of losing respect. I mean, let's say the guy doesn't want to get a job, or he drinks too much, or what would be a situation where she would lose respect?
Well, those are great examples. And I know women who have struggled with that. And really, I get it. I can see why they don't respect him, because he's not stepping up to the plate and doing his part as part of this strategic alliance.
Right.
So, but it could be something even far more subtle and really something far more illegitimate, something more controlling. Like perhaps he's decided to quit a high-paying job so he can get a job as a school teacher, because that's what he's always really wanted to do with his life.
Okay.
Now, it may mean that they don't keep their membership in the country club.
Right.
And for some people, that diminution of their lifestyle is absolutely unacceptable.
Right.
And because of the partner's values, that choice, which is his choice to make, that choice is not respected. And so there's that loss of respect. And how would you possibly get that back absent some profound personal spiritual transformation?
Yeah, but if he wants to be a poet or writer and live on the beach, and she wants the country club, they have different values, and he would be inauthentic if he gave up his dream, don't you think?
Yeah, I do. And I think the same is true for the goose as well as the gander in this situation, right? I mean, it doesn't matter to me who we're talking about gender-wise. Right. I think we all need to be our authentic selves. And I think that's the essence of really a great intimacy.
Exactly.
Is letting the other person know who I really am.
Yeah. And also, I like when you talk about abuse-free means to share without fear of disapproval. And sometimes you're afraid, say one of the partners is afraid to say something to the other partner. And they say that males may withhold more for fear of being, let's say, put down or something by their spouse. So how do you see that happening? The idea that you can share, and not be attacked for that.
Well, I was laughing because I have to agree with you. I recognize that that's so true of us males, isn't it? That we have a rather rigid idea of what our options are, and the different ways of being a man are in most of our minds are quite limited. So we tend to be very guarded. I remember when I met the woman who is my wife, and 24 years ago, right. And how tentative I was in sharing some of the most important parts of who I am.
Right.
Because the fear was, if I really put myself out there, well, it would be a quite legitimate reaction to not like me.
Yeah, so you would be kicked out even before you started, you thought at the time.
Well, certainly fearing that, yes. Because we all crave and need love in our lives.
Right. So how did you develop trust in her that you can share your deepest dark secrets and still she would still love you?
Well, I think I have a piece of advice that's going to help everybody with this, because I get asked this a lot by my clients, and that is to ladder up your disclosures. You don't lead with your deepest, darkest secret, right? Oh. You lead with something really small, like my favorite color is blue.
Okay. So on the first date, you're not going to say all the crazy things that have happened to you on the first date.
Absolutely not. I'm going to be somewhat guarded, and I think that's really an intimacy skill, is knowing how much to share and when to share it.
Right, self-disclosure in a sense.
Right, and learning how to make small talk that's appropriate actually is giving us an amazing amount of information. You're on a date with a person for the first time, and you're finding out, is she friendly? Does he have a sense of humor? Is she welcoming?
Right.
Is he comfortable to be around? And this kind of information is invaluable, and it forms the foundation of future disclosures.
Right. But if they say the first date, I'm high maintenance, selfish, and I can be an SOB once in a while. So that's not exactly the right thing to say, right?
Well, no, that would not be right. Or for her to confide that, she's high maintenance and she needs a lot of money to get by.
Exactly.
That's, that would be very off-putting, but it could be quite charming.
Right.
It could be quite charming in the right context.
That's true, yeah. If you don't mind that, that's good. Now, there's also something that I think you talk about is the power of no. That saying that, I deserve to live an abuse-free life, and I'm not going to do what I don't want to do. And that's an important thing, right, to teach people the power of no.
Yeah, and the hard thing there, I think, is that people forget. This is, again, something that might sound harsh to some people, but I think most of us who are normal fall in love easily. And I don't think that that's a weakness or a sign of superficiality. I think it's a sign of great strength, because it means that we are able to perceive that which is lovable in a wide variety of people. So I fall in love with someone, and then I have these irrational beliefs that, I have to make it work, or we're in love, so we should be together. And instead, if we could just hold this love loosely, then, because there's a lot more information that needs to be gathered, because love is a necessary but insufficient condition for a successful relationship, right?
Yeah, when you say hold love loosely, what do you mean by that exactly?
Well, that I've fallen in love with her, but love by itself doesn't mean that a relationship would be successful with this person. The Beatles were wrong. They lied to us. Love is not all we need.
So you're kind of holding back a little bit. I mean, I talk about love types, the dating masquerade, where people have a kind of a psychological mask, and then they fall in love with the surface appearance or something, and then they discover they're not really compatible once they get to know each other better. So you're kind of saying hold off on the falling in love until you can take off the mask a little bit and really find out a little bit more about the person.
Actually, to be precise, I'm saying let yourself fall in love, because it's a great experience. It feels wonderful. But just because you're in love doesn't mean you're meant to be a partner with this person. So if I can hold my love loosely, it's a fact that I'm in love with this person, but it is not a fact that I've determined whether or not she is compatible with me. Does she even respect me? Is it even possible that we could have a life together? Are our goals, our values matching up enough that we can be compatible? Yeah.
It's kind of going back to that, what I was saying, that that love is deep understanding of another. So the word is deep. The deeper you go, the more profound the love is, because it's based on reality, right? It's authentic. And
right.
There's beauty to that.
Well, like let's give an example of the person who falls in love with an alcoholic. And they can deeply understand this person and deeply understand that they're an alcoholic. But they're in the back of their mind, if they retain this idea, but I can help him change.
Codependency.
Yeah, I can help her change. Even if we deeply understand that person and therefore love them, it doesn't mean that we're now compatible, because when they're drinking, they're not in the same room with us.
That's excellent. But then the second part of that is to create light in the world. So if they're alcoholic, then you can't really create light, because they're caught up in this obsession or this problem. And the key is to move from that. Now, I was going to ask you something, Stephen. When you talk about abuse-free, what if we also define it as compassion-filled? Like, look at the positive side. Like, if we were to teach empathy and compassion in our school systems and even in our families, that would be a great thing. If people could almost role play, like play the other side of the person who's suffering and see what it feels like. And that would kind of change things, because I think compassion is what we need. The empathy and compassion, that's what's lacking. Right.
And in our own ethical codes, we have, do no harm, but we also have an admonition to do good. And so we're supposed to do both, right?
Yes.
But I think it helps to almost like parentheses on a phrase. It helps to bracket things with, I don't want to be so compassionate. I want to be compassionate, but I also want to be mindful of the possibility I can be abusive, because all of us, starting in childhood, have been abusive of somebody at some point. And that would mean, because we've done it in the past, it's probably the most accurate predictor of future behavior. We have a likelihood of resorting to abusive behavior. So I don't like to forget that part of it, but sure, for me, compassion, why would I ever partner up with somebody, form a strategic alliance with somebody who wasn't really, truly, not only crazy about me, but compassionate toward me.
Definitely. And also, I think the word empathy is a little more defined. It's to put yourself in the shoes of another. It's really hard to hurt someone else if you're in their shoes because you are that person.
Oh,
so
yeah.
That's kind of the reversal idea. And also, you can actually reverse what I call reverse aggression is that you can learn the lesson, the opposite lesson from someone who's angry. Because, let's say their heart rate increases, their face is red, and they can't control themselves. They're in a rage. You can say, well, I don't want to be like that. I want to learn how to be peaceful, how to be content. That could be another way to look at it. Instead of, sometimes we'll feel angry toward them or even fearful. Why don't we reverse that and say, I'm going to take that lesson and do the opposite?
Right.
And you said your dad was an aggressive man. Did you learn the opposite from him?
Well, as I mentioned earlier in our discussion, I became a very controlled and controlling person, a lot like Mr. Spock. So in my family, the takeaway from my father's behavior was that anger was bad, and that because they conflated anger with abuse. So if you want to prevent abuse, you have to keep men from getting angry.
Right.
And I hear that all the time from marriage counseling clients who say, well, I just don't like it when he or she gets angry. I don't want her to get angry. I don't want anybody to get angry. Right. And that's really a bit of classic misdirection because trying to repress all anger as a goal, as a primary goal, does nothing for us in terms of problem solving. And instead, I just would encourage people to take a look at how can we express our anger in an abuse-free, respectful manner.
Well, I was going to say that awareness. The key is awareness of anger, I think. If you're aware of it at the moment it occurs, and you can see yourself even feeling that the color red or something, you feel the red inside you, but you don't really necessarily have to react to it and be abusive, like you said, and also not to repress it either. So there must be a middle ground where you can experience it.
Well, yeah, and it should be noted by the listeners, especially the one in the relationship who's not angry all the time, is that we can get quite abusive and controlling when we're not angry at all. So they're two independent variables. I can be angry and respectful. I can be quite tightly controlled and not angry at all, and even perhaps amused, but being quite abusive.
Interesting. So you're talking about a manipulative, like passive-aggressive kind of abuse?
Or even the abuse of a bully. For a bully, bullying is very amusing. It's very pleasurable. He doesn't have to be angry to be abusive.
Right.
And that's why focusing on abuse, I think, is far more liberating and helpful for people.
Yes, it's fascinating, Steve. You have an amazing depth of knowledge here. This is really very, very interesting. A lot of complexity here. And I read somewhere that do you do Aikido by any chance? Are you into martial arts?
Well, how did you know that? I love Aikido.
Yeah, I've actually studied it myself. Aiki is the redirection of energy, and basically matching and mirroring people. And you do that, I would imagine, in your practice?
I do, and my best friend is the local Aikido sensei. So we have breakfast together every week, and the two professions are really quite similar. Because you're an Aikidoist, there's a relationship between the two combatants, and that relationship can be resolved harmoniously. And I think the same thing is true of two of us in a conflict. And I think the principles of Aikido really transfer over very well to marriage.
Yeah, I think Thomas Crum did Aiki. Have you read those books?
No.
Aiki. So Aiki is kind of like a philosophy of Aikido, but applying it to conflict and resolution, where you kind of join the person and then you lead them. So you might even raise your voice and says, "I see you're hurt by this, and I love you very much." But you match their intensity, but your words are different.
Right.
So it's almost like a way to guide, and to join and then lead in the situation.
Absolutely, and also by extending the energy of the attacker, so that we can say things like, well, tell me more about your anger. And so they're coming out farther and farther and farther. And what happens when we feel really understood about what we're angry about? We're relaxed. Yes. All energy dissipates.
Exactly. That's beautiful. We really have a nice harmony here. I like what we're talking about. And I'm going to have to invite you to do some sparring sometime if you want. But in a good way. We're not going to fight, right? We're just going to
Right.
And it's been wonderful to have you, Stephen. This hour has flown by quickly. I think we've actually gotten a little overtime, but there's an amazing amount of concepts here. And Where can people get a hold of you and learn more about what you have? Do you have a website or anything like that?
People who want to know some more about my thoughts can go to, this is so easy, right? StephenIng.com.
ING.
So, yeah, it couldn't get easier than Stephen E. And I also, I really would suggest people take a look on YouTube. Just put my name on YouTube, and the first thing that comes up is my TEDx talk, and it's on your magic sex number.
That's wonderful. So, there's a lot of things here. Now, you also are an expert on sex, and we'll have to do that on another time, another show.
Well, I'd love to.
Yeah, relationships and sexuality. And so, there's a lot to offer here. I think living a life of compassion and love, Love University, but also intelligence and strength and discipline. Those are things that we really value. And basically creating a world of positivity, because there's a lot of negativity out there in the world. So, Stephen, you've helped us do that today. So I want to thank you again for that.
It was a real pleasure, Dr. Avila, talking to you today.
Beautiful. So then, this is Dr. Alex Avila with Love University. And again, we anticipate you've enjoyed today's talk and you apply it in your everyday life. In fact, why don't we give you an abuse-free challenge, right, Stephen? Well, what can we say to our listeners for this week?
I'm going to challenge everyone to try to get through one entire week without abusing anyone in your home. No harsh words.
Yes.
No disapproval in terms of your tone of voice. Just to see what your brain does with that challenge.
Right. And I guess the benefits, right? Do you feel more peaceful? Are you more productive, perhaps? Maybe you have better health, possibly, as a result of these changes.
Well, yeah, as a lifestyle, for sure. I think getting started, though, I want to be really realistic with people. I think if we're all in denial to the degree that we use abusive behaviors to control those around us, just being aware of it at the end of a day and being able to take note of it, it's quite humbling. And it offers an amazing inspiration for personal growth, because none of us really want to be abusive.
Definitely. All right, Stephen, thanks again. So this is Dr. Alex Avila. This has been Love University. If you have any questions about today's show, or if you want to be on our show someday, or whatever it is you want, you can reach us at lovetype4u@aol.com. That's LOVETYPE, the number 4, letter U at AOL.com. Loveuniversity.love, and call us at 310-226-8090. And again, everyone, put away your laptop, your iPads, your notes and pencils. Love University is now dismissed.